Hey again, Reg Techies. Welcome to the only podcast that helps employers and recruiters connect with more candidates through technology-inspired conversations. Recruiting technology is the key to hiring great talent. That's why this show exists. All right, Cliquify's 2023 State of Employer Branding Research is a comprehensive survey on shaping priorities, budgets, and tools for talent branders worldwide. Over 600 practitioners responded to the survey. And joining me now to discuss the findings is their CEO, Amit Parmar. Hey, Amit, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Chris?
Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back from your travels. You've been out and about this year on hitting the conference circuit. So how's that been going?
Yeah, it's been going great. Always learning from other talent leaders and practitioners out there, and so that's really the main goal, is just being out there, making sure that we are staying on top of all the trends that are happening out there.
Definitely. Well, before we get to that, my first question for you is what's when it comes to employer branding, what's the biggest mistake you see employers make today when it comes to just crafting that or trying to execute it?
Yeah, I think it's really how they define employer branding, because just the way companies actually think about employer branding today, and in many cases is transactional. It's like, okay, I'm gonna put a message out there and hope for people to apply or get attracted to where they want them to go. And it's not as simple as that. Or I'm going to do a programmatic ad and all of a sudden I'm going to get these amazing candidates. I think you got to have a long-term approach to how you think about employer branding inside out, right? Like, are you actually taking care of your employees? How are you doing layoffs potentially? Like, all of those things actually impact what your brand is. And overall, it's a long-term play. It's not like you can just turn a switch on and off. And that's the biggest mistake I think a lot of talent professionals out there potentially make, right, is how they view employer branding and the budgets that are associated with it. So we'll actually talk about that in terms of what we found. So
yeah, I like that answer. The long term, it's a long term investment, right, in your talent acquisition efforts, and it's an ongoing effort. I think you're always be branding, right? I guess
always be branding, just like we're always, what is it? What's the saying? Always be selling.
Always be closing. Yeah.
Right.
That's from that movie, by the way, by Gary Lindelof.
Okay, yeah, I got to check it out.
Definitely. All right, I'm going to pull up the report here, and as I do that, what's the biggest challenge you found in the survey that talent branders face today? Would you say?
Yeah, there are some hypotheses, of course, that we had going into the survey, and we validated some of that. In terms of the biggest challenges that talent branding professionals and talent leaders are facing today, is frankly just the lack of funding and budgets that are available to them to actually do their jobs effectively. Often an army of one or two people max that a company can afford, a large company can afford, and they're being asked to do so many things to support the employer brand, and often they're not equipped with the right tools, or they have too many tools actually that they're using that are just confusing everybody in the process. So those are kind of the big challenges that we heard of from the survey respondents.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the priorities that you found from this report. I'm going to read from the PDF right here. You can download this at clickify.me. By the way, we'll put a link in the show notes and everything. Top priorities for branders worldwide: social media advocacy along with career site revamp were among the top two areas of focus identified. DE&I and belonging was a consistent theme to ensure content, messaging, and narrative attracts people from diverse backgrounds and thoughts. So talk about the priorities you see coming out of this survey.
Yeah, we actually, this was a qualitative answer, so it wasn't a drop down or anything. So we had to churn through a lot of information to boil it down to these priorities. And essentially what it comes down to is, how are you being perceived out there where people are hanging out, which is these days is social media channels, be it LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. TikTok is a hit or miss right now with what's going on. And the career sites, right? Like, how are you actually driving the traffic back to what your overall story is? And so a lot of talent leaders and employer branding leaders out there are focused on these two things. And then you have a consistent theme, which is the content, right? So if it's content on social media channels and or your career site, how inclusive is that content,
Mm,
and are you keeping that in mind as a consistent theme that as a fabric across all of your channels, essentially?
yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the career side. To me, that's the like sort of the starting point for EB. I mean, that's kind of where I think you should focus your efforts first. If you're not doing anything for EB yet, start there. Right. Talk about the importance of that career side. I think.
Yeah, I think the career site is interesting. Let's face it, nobody wakes up every day. Chris, I don't wake up every day for sure, and I don't say I'm going to check out these companies' career sites today,
Mm,
right?
but they
And I can
could.
tell you
Yeah.
for sure, candidates don't do that either, right? So the career sites are important. Don't get me wrong. I think that's one avenue for you to tell your story, a major avenue. And as you're thinking about that story, I think the content that ends up on career sites is super important. So, one of the things we're finding, not just from the survey, but just how we analyze content through our platform across our client groups, is it's not the corporate jargon
Mhm.
that drives the most engagement. It's the real stories. Of course, a lot of focus on testimonials on career sites. Um, Glassdoor reviews, Blind, and Comparably. Those are also an area that did pop up in the more detailed priorities list that you're showing here. So that is also a big area where talent branding folks are involved in ensuring that their ratings, are rightfully represented in some of these, review sites.
Yeah. Some of the other priorities here: improving the employee experience, turn them into advocates for the brand. I think it's also a pretty key strategy in terms of getting your employees involved in your employer brand. Talk about that a bit if you could.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is so, employer branding is a very, it's a pretty critical role in the talent equation. I view the employer branding role as the fabric of the overall experience, right? And these roles are actually now popping up in some companies as well, the employee experience manager or the leader. um, and it's super important to understand, are you actually offering the experiences that you're going to market with to attract candidates? Because if there's a huge gap in those two parts of the equation, then you're going to see churn inevitably, and turnover pretty quickly in your organization when you're selling something else and people are experiencing something else. So it is an inside out view. So really understanding and driving that positive employee experience, and then turning them into your advocates. Telling stories about, hey, this is what it's really like to work here. Of course, nothing is perfect, right? Every organization knows, doesn't matter how funded you are. Every organization knows they have improvements that they have to make, but that's the reality of what we need to show to candidates. Don't be afraid to be real, basically, in your content. Doesn't matter which channel it is, right?
Yeah. You've also identified a shift towards organic recruiting marketing versus paid media, something that I think a lot of employers struggle with. But if they nail that, they can really, change the game there and move the needle as far as lowering their costs for recruiting and things like that, right?
Yeah, and this is yet another area. Paid media, there's a place for it, no doubt. Overall, though, you'll see, I mean, Google's ad spend, ad revenue has been declining, right? So when you look at the macro environment, generally the ad spend is declining across digital landscape, right?
Yep.
And the reasons for that, of course, right? The prices keep going up in terms of ads, and then the ROI keeps reducing. And so the other lever that is usually under leveraged today are your employees, and how do you get them to be excited and be your advocates for the brand. And that's essentially what we mean by organic employer branding.
Yeah. Metrics that matter. Walk me through some of these metrics about EB and how to quantify it all and how to measure the results of all this.
Yeah, Chris, I'm a huge numbers guy generally, and some of this was actually very interesting to us. We are seeing from employer branding and talent leaders out there some sophistication in how they're measuring the ROI of employer branding. And there's some general metrics here that you see around quality of applicant, cost per applicant. They're your traditional metrics in talent acquisition and talent attraction. But some of the things that really popped out for us was content quality is being measured now. Quality of applicant is always like a question mark, right? Like you ask 10 people, they'll have a different way in terms of how to measure the quality of applicant. The other one that stood out to us was this employee advocacy participation rate. So the number and percent of employees that are participating on social media as well as review sites. So they're voluntarily going out there and actually participating in it.
Mhm.
That's a very interesting, metric for us from an employee experience standpoint. And then the employee net promoter score. I mean, we're all familiar with NPS scores on the marketing side and the sales side, but it's starting to make its way into the employer branding world now as well, which is the ENS is what ENPS is what we call it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. There's a lot of fragmentation in the tools that many branders use. You guys there at Cliquify try and consolidate that effort for them with your platform. But talk about how many tools they're using today and how they can kind of save time with a platform like yours.
Yeah. We I think there's a slide or page on that, Chris. If we could just hover over that real
Oh,
quick,
happy
that'd be great.
this one here.
Yeah, we actually asked how happy are people with their tools, right? The employer branding people with the tools that they're using, and honestly, like it was kind of a hit or miss, right? 52% of them actually feel mediocre about their tools, right? So they're not like overly impressed or happy with all the tools that they have at their fingertips. What we did find is a majority of the users or survey respondents are using well over well over two tools for sure, but certainly 3 to 5 tools is where we saw like the biggest biggest responses is they're using about 3 to 5 tools to not only build their content, like different editors that they're using to activate the brand through an employee advocacy type of a program. So they're using some kind of a social activation tool to enable that. And then there's a video component to that. So there's all these video solutions that are out there that they're also using. And then ultimately, all that ROI data is like super hard to measure because they're using so many different platforms. And not only that, you're actually confusing your users, which is your employees and your hiring managers in particular. And that's what we have found in the survey is that there's certainly room to come and really provide a solution that offers all 3 of those or 3 to 4 of those capabilities. So you don't have to be, cutting across these different platforms.
Yeah. So how would you sum this up? You've been talking to your client base, you've been on the road a lot lately. What sum up what people are saying, and then sum up a little bit about this report here from your perspective.
Yeah. Look, we're always being asked to do more with less. I don't think that's going away, right? If I take a step back and say, okay, how can I continue to do more with less? And you see that in spades in our survey as well. Like headcounts aren't increasing in HR generally, not just in employer branding, but just
Right.
HR as a function. But you're being asked to do more with less, and I do believe there are tools available now more than ever to be able to do more with less in a very cost-effective way. Less headcount, less budgets, and you can scale content and advocacy and all of these programs at a fairly reasonable cost these days. So that's really the key takeaway that I had. I'm sure there are a lot more nuggets here in the report that I'd welcome the listeners to go through in detail, and would love to talk about it with them as well.
Yeah, again, you can get it at cliquify.me. It's Liquify with a C at the beginning there.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I like to put that in there. Last question, I guess, is give me a quick story if you remember. Like, what's one example of great employer branding you saw just in your career that stood out to you? Could be could be a blog post, could be a website or something like that. Do you have something that comes to mind there?
Yeah, there's actually an image that comes to mind. Right? There's something that popped up, and I know it did go viral a few years ago, where it was like I think it was an Adobe screen where somebody had written like, we're looking for designers, and it was penciled, and it got so much virality, just that image itself. There was nothing else.
It was like a scribbled message on a
There's a scribbled message. Do you remember
I
that?
think I remember that. Yeah.
Right. right? I think that was brilliant. I mean, there's so many other brilliant ideas out there. That one stood out to me. Of course, we're creatures of like low attention spans, right? So like the key thing is how do you get something out there so quick? Not a lot of verbiage, just very simple, that sticks with people, right?
Yeah, I
And
think out of the box. Go on, like I would say, go into Fiverr, like, and find some creative writer there and see what they can come up with. Something like that would be interesting.
yeah, and we're constantly analyzing the actual content that's driving what kind of behavior, right? And that's the cool thing that we're at least enabling talent leaders to do and employer branding leaders to do as well. And of course, with the advent of AI and GPT now, I think it's going to be even more important for you to separate yourself from the bots, if you will. It's
Good stuff, Amit. Well, appreciate you stopping by today, and look forward to what's coming with Cliquify. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
That'll do it for this episode of the RegTech Podcast. Be sure to follow us on the socials: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn at RegTech Media. See every podcast, video, blog we publish. Thanks for listening, everyone, and watching. And remember, always be recruiting.